All right, so good morning. I got a few requests over the past few weeks for Denali, Rainier, and Aconcagua so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the progression from Rainier to Aconcagua, then to Denali, as sort of being a classic like North American and South American progression to prep for Denali and or bigger peaks. So this week I'm going to look at Rainier. I've never been to Mount Rainier, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take y'all through my process of planning from afar so that you can be familiar with what that looks like when I've never touched the area before. And this does not include like the research into the routes that I would do, such as hopping on Mountain Project, 14ers.com, or other resources that are out there. This is purely going to be focused on me looking at a map and going through that planning process. All right, so now I should be able to see a CalTopo map that is showing Mount Rainier as the primary screen. So on CalTopo, for some of the common zones, you can just type in the name of a location up top here, and generally it'll bring you to that location. If not, then grids will be required for some of the less known mountains or zones that we may use. So for this one, I just typed in Rainier, and it took me right to Mount Rainier as the center point. So looking at the right side, I'm going to turn on, or I'm going to use the Map Builder Hybrid overlay, which is what's currently displayed on the screen. It has a bunch of trails that are pre-planned, like the common trails that are used in those zones. This is a CalTopo specific map that combines some topographic features. As you can see, there's contour lines on the screen now, and then some, let's call it map data, like these trails and roads that you can see that have been added. CalTopo is continuously updating the maps that they have and that they use, so that some of these maps are actually available for you to download and use offline, depending on the type of membership or account that you build yourself. But now that I'm in the Map Builder Hybrid, that's going to be the primary planning map I use. Otherwise, I'll use some global imagery, which is a satellite view, often for snow-based areas. This satellite view are going to be a little bit harder because of the reflection off the snow. Sometimes you'll also have some Google layers, such as Google Satellite, which those can be better. As you can see here, it's a little bit more user-friendly, but again, the reflection off the snow is often going to be hard in alpine zones. So if I'm looking for a cliff or some other detail on features, I'll click through some layers, but generally I'm going to do my initial planning off of Map Builder Hybrid. Next thing I'm going to add in is going to be your slope angle shading. I'm almost always using this layer just because it shows me some of the potential hazardous areas that we can use. When it comes to winter on Mount Rainier, I'm going to first look at potential avenues of approach. So what I see as primary options are there. You have this one down here in the south, which is labeled as Alta Vista, and I believe it's the Paradise parking area. And then you also have these two roads up here that get you decently close if we're talking about shorter approaches. Then another one I see is down here to the southwest as well. So I'm going to zoom in on the Alta Vista because that looks like the biggest, most common zone first, and see that there's a big parking area here in the center of the screen now, labeled as Paradise. So that's going to be where I'm going to put my initial primary route from. CalTopo has this really neat snap to feature. So I'm going to just go ahead and add a line starting from Paradise. And one thing I do know about Mount Rainier is that typically people camp at Muir Camp, which is up in this zone. So I'm going to build in a route that's going to go from Paradise through Camp Muir all the way up to the summit itself. So there are a few different trails you could use here. You have Panorama Point, which looks like it has a bathroom and some other features there that could make it a preferred area to use, or an alternative could be to come up. This trail looks like it's called Golden Gate Trail. So I'm going to go through the Panorama Point option, and you go past that bathroom in case we wanted to use it. And all the way up to Camp Muir, just using this snap to feature that you can see has populated on the screen. Now coming past Camp Muir, we can get all the way to the summit. And that's just the very quick way to build an initial route, right? Using the lines and the pre-existing routes, especially in these popular zones. Now that I have that initial like primary route, I'm going to go back in and start building in some of my checkpoints. So I have known points that I'm going to pass. When I'm looking for these checkpoints, I'm going to look for key terrain features that I know I can observe on the ground when I'm there. So for example, Panorama Point looks like it could be a great checkpoint. Then you also have some of these twists and turns in this area. So first, I'm going to have this Alta Vista zone here. I'm going to move a checkpoint down in that area. I'm actually going to put it right on top of this terrain feature, because now I know that if I pass with the terrain feature on my left, that I'm on this right trail. If I pass with the terrain feature on my right, then I'm on this trail. And then if I pass with low ground sloping to either side, then I'm on the top of the terrain feature. So that's a good area for me to identify where some what trail I'm on as I'm moving. So that's going to be checkpoint 1, CP1. What I didn't mark is my start point. So I'm going to hit that right now, start point SP. And the reason I'm marking checkpoints instead of just having a route is as I move through these areas, maybe you're trying to save some battery, or just your phone or whatever navigation system you're using dies. So having marked checkpoints allows you to, one, turn off tracking on a phone or on a GPS watch or other device that you're using, so that you can navigate from checkpoint to checkpoint and just check your position if you need to. This way you're not running it the whole time. Next, I'm going to put another checkpoint right here. It looks like there's a trail intersection, so that's going to be a good spot for me to mark. And then I'll put a checkpoint 3 at a sharp hairpin, and another trail intersection, which this could be taking me to a bathroom if I wanted to use it or needed it, and potentially even a campsite, because you have some lower angle terrain in this zone too if you wanted to do this as a slower day. Excuse me, a longer trip. Now I move into sort of the long uphill portion of this route. You can see that it's not too steep, because the contour lines are fairly well spaced. And then about halfway up, you transition onto the glacier. So I'm going to put a marker there as well for checkpoint 4. This is not going to be necessarily an exact point, but it is a marker to know that you'll be coming into some glaciated terrain as we go. And looking at this, that'd likely be where I'd change my method of travel to being roped up, just according to this map, because now we're going into where the glacier is currently marked. Next point, we'll have checkpoint 5, which is also Camp Muir. which is one of the common areas that I understand that people like to stop and stay overnight on this specific route. And then also having a camp there also allows you to go lighter to the summit because you'll be able to drop any equipment that you don't need for that final push to the top. Now zooming in here, I see some steep terrain where we get up onto a spur. So a spur is a high ground. If you look at your hand, when we're talking spurs, a spur is going to follow the knuckle of your finger. So a spur is your pieces of high ground. The way I can tell that from the contours is that the contours actually point downhill. So if I zoom in here, I can see these contour lines are pointing downhill. And that's the way I know that that's a point of high ground and a spur. So I'm going to put a checkpoint there because I now know I'm on top of a spur. So that'll be checkpoint 6. Have another key turn right in this area where I'm going to end up below some cliff lines. So I'm going to put a marker there as well, because that is a point that there could be some overhead hazard. And it's also looks like a key turn in the route. So I know that I go from the disappointment cleaver and turn right up to towards some next high terrain. Also, you see that there's the black portions of the slope angle shading. That's actually crevasses that are marked as of the time that this map was built. So looking at the crevasse layup, you actually can pre-plan. And another way to do this is using satellite imagery when you're pre-planning your crevasse travel, because you can see where crevasses do exist or have existed in the past. Again, following a piece of terrain. So again, a high ground, a spur as a checkpoint. And I'm just going to put the rest of my checkpoints in here before transitioning to the next portion. Now, what you could do is you could always put checkpoints going down the route as well, as long as I am taking the same route down as I am up, then I do not do that. The reason being is I can just follow my checkpoints in reverse. However, if I, for whatever reason, had decided I want to take a different route down than I had up, then that would be where I would add in some additional checkpoints. So, for example, potentially I wanted to do this in one day and then do a ski descent. Looking at some of the terrain, I could potentially come down the route that we had just gone up. But considering how much crevasse terrain I'm seeing over there just from this map reconnaissance that we're doing right now, I might actually look at this dotted line here as an alternate route that we can go down. So I'm going to add that in as an alternate route that can be a condition dependent option. So the great thing is that I can see that up to checkpoint 2, the route's the same. So I'm going to start from checkpoint 2 as where the route splits. Again, using this snap to feature and using from the map what looks like a less complex route all the way up to the summit. So now that we have our second route, I'm going to change the color of that here to help me differentiate between the two as I'm using it on the map. Now I have my second route, and I'll use the same colors to help me differentiate between the checkpoints as well. I'm going to continue my checkpoint numbering. So my final checkpoint at the top was checkpoint 11. Now I know that checkpoint 2 is where I split. there are two ways you can number your checkpoints to help you. One is you can just continue the numbering like I'm going to right now. Another method is that you could start with a 1 or a 2 if you haven't gone over those first 10. So for example, I could turn all the checkpoints from here into checkpoint 2-1, checkpoint 2-2, checkpoint 2-3, and so on. That way I know it's on my second route or my alternate route, just from the way I've been numbering my checkpoints. So actually, it works since we turn at checkpoint 2. So I'm going to actually use that method instead of continuing numbering, of using checkpoint 2-1 as my first checkpoint on this route. Again, it's at an obvious turn and a point of high ground on a spur where I've now passed through some crevasse terrain. Looking at this map here, we see a potential series of crevasses in that zone. And then it looks like we cross onto a crevasse here. So I'm actually going to change up what I just did and put a checkpoint 2-1 as being here. And that'll be my marker of crossing onto the glacier where I want to rope up. And then this one I had done previously will be checkpoint 2-2. Now, as I'm doing this, notice that I'm willing to make changes, and a plan is a place to shift from. It's creating a known place to communicate. So I can give this route to friends, family, and partners, and I can also talk over it before I get on the route. And the reason that's important is because one, I imagine everybody here has at some point gone on a trip where you're just following along and didn't really know what was going on. And that's okay. But the risk you're putting yourself at is you are now just tagging along and you don't know the route as well. And like I've completely done that as well. I just recommend against it. Right. And so if you do a pre-route brief or talk through with your partners, even if it's 2 to 5 minutes because you're super excited to get out there, like it can get everybody on the same page for what you're going to do. So I highly recommend having like a primary and an alternate route. In this case, the red route here, which we can call route red if we want to, or the Camp Muir route, looks like if avalanche hazard is high, that's going to be probably our best route, just because, and the reason I say that is the steeper terrain, the like yellow and red terrain is all avalanche terrain. So this is going to expose you to the least avalanche risk. If avalanche conditions are good, then maybe I would choose this green route. But let's see what the profiles of the two look like as far as distance and time. So I can pull up the profiles of them here. So over our green route, we go from 5,000 feet up to 14,000. So we have just right around 9,000 feet of elevation gain along this route as it's planned. Up to Camp Muir, as I'm sliding here, and you can see a dot sliding on the screen as I do that. So it'll mark, and now I'm at Camp Muir. You have 4,600 feet of elevation gain up to that point, which then means you would have an additional 5,000 feet of elevation gain the following day to the summit. So at checkpoint 2, where we have planned our break, we're at just under 1,000 feet of elevation gain, and we are at 1 mile in. So red route is 7 miles total, with 10,000 feet of elevation or 9,000 feet of elevation gain. The elevation gain likely isn't going to change significantly between the two, but let's see what the mileage looks like. So now we have our green route starting from checkpoint 2. We have 5 miles. So your horizontal distance is about 1 mile less, because remember we started at 1 mile in at checkpoint 2. And we have had 7 miles total, 7.3 miles total. So we actually have slightly less gain, or excuse me, distance to cover. Looking at the total gross distance here, we have 8,300 feet. If you remember back, we were at just over 700 feet up to checkpoint 2. So the total vertical gain is going to be the same between these two routes. So now we have a primary route that we can take up if avalanche conditions aren't favorable. And then because there's more steep terrain on this route here, it means that it's a shorter route by horizontal distance. Vertically, the gain is exactly the same. And if the snow conditions are more stable, maybe this is an alternate route that we could choose to take up and or down, because it looks like it could potentially be a fun ski just from my map recon. Now, looking at let's say a third potential route, contingency route, I'd look at potentially this road here. I don't know where this road opens or closes. This marker could be an indicator of a gate on the route. But let's see if we start here, this parking area in this campsite, let's see what it gets us for this route. So now I'm going to change the color. The one color I'm never going to use when I do routes, just to prevent confusion for myself, is blue, just because that is also what our rivers are. So if you notice, you have your water features, those are always going to be your those are always going to be your water features. So I'm going to avoid using blue for any of my routes because it just creates an awkward linear feature. So now this purple route is our contingency route. Let's see what the profile looks like and see if it's something that we would potentially want to go for. So notice that we have a total elevation gain of 10,000 feet now. So we've added an additional 1,000 feet of elevation gain and 8 miles of distance. So this is going to be a longer route and a longer day. Once I go do my next bit of research, which would be looking at what the road closures and road openings look like, this I imagine would be a route that could be closed because it looks less major than the other two. But it could be an additional route that might be a little bit less crowded because the parking areas look significantly smaller on the map. So again, it has 2 separate campsites on the route and some additional options for like where to stop or to avoid crowds if that's what you want. I'm not going to go through the process of putting checkpoints in this route. If y'all choose to, you can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to pause at this point now that we have an initial plan and see, Andrew, if you have any questions and or comments to this point.
I think so. I guess comments. I know because I used to live up in Washington. I know that Burroughs area, that's Sunrise, that's closed for about 8 months out of the year.
Okay.
There's really only one way in and one way out for spring and winter, and it's that Paradise route. So that's kind of your best bet. In terms of planning and looking kind of at time, how do you take that into account for these routes? Because I know that will also play a big part with speed being safety.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'll talk time and planning considerations. So there are 2 different formulas that you can use for time and planning considerations. And actually, give me 1 second, I'll pull that up so you can reference it on the screen when I talk it. So the sort of 2 different methods you can use. One is called Munter units, and that's the one that's generally used by guides. It's fairly adjustable for your team and your speed. Then the other is the military planning factor for like tactical operations. That's one's going to be more applicable to when you're moving under load and like in a more challenging conditions. So Sharing the screen here with the first planning consideration. So, okay, so this is the military planning factor, and it doesn't take into consideration conditions. This is one that is faster and is easily modifiable to your fitness level, but it's a place to start. If you're carrying a heavy load, this one's going to be fairly accurate. But if you are going light and fast, then it's going to be less accurate for you. So planning factor one is regardless of the conditions, you're going to plan for 2 to 3 kilometers per hour in horizontal distance, and then add 1 hour per 1,000 feet of elevation gain, or 1 hour for 2,000 feet of elevation loss. Again, this one does not take into consideration like mode of travel, whether it be skis or anything else. But it does do a good job of accounting for weight added. So for example here, if you're walking with 1,000 feet of elevation gain over 4 kilometers, you can see the math here, get 1 hour plus 2 hours is a 3 hours total for that movement. Now moving forward to the one that's a little bit more complicated, but also again, modifiable for you, is the Munter units option. So the starting point is we're going to look at what each unit is. In 1 unit, we'll talk what the numbers end up being. But so 1 kilometer is 1 unit, 100 meters of elevation gain or elevation loss is 1 unit. The difference with the Munter units is we're going to have Munter modifiers here. So this is where you can start with the numbers that are on the screen. And then once you know how fast or how slow you gain or lose elevation, then you can modify these over time as you gain more experience. But this is the place to start. So for your Munter modifiers, uphill walking and skiing is 4. Like harder terrain such as bushwhacking or post holing, you're going to be using a 2 for your modifier. Downhill walking is a 6. So notice it's accounting for moving faster while walking downhill. And then downhill skiing is a 10. Whereas bushwhacking still going to be a 2 because you're moving slower. All right. So this is a tried and true method that like a lot of guiding services will use as they're doing their planning for time. So how do you use your Munter units? You can see the same example we used before down below here. So on the top, it's a division method. So on the top, you're going to add all the Munter units together, and then you're going to divide that by your modifiers. So in the example of walking with 1,000 feet of elevation gain over 4 kilometers, so 1,000 feet of elevation gain is 300 meters, which gives you 3 Munter units. Then 4 kilometers is 4 units. So you have a total of 7 units divided by your walking uphill modifier of 4, which tells you 1.75 hours for that distance covered. Now, this, for most people that are, I'd say, a good fitness level, like you spend a lot of time in the mountains and you can move uphill fairly quickly, it's going to be a fairly good estimate of how you can move. Now, if you're going fast and light, the best thing to know is what is your time per amount of vertical. So for me, for example, I know that my pace, no matter how tired I am, up to about 11,000 feet is 1,700 feet per hour vertical gain. So that's my planning factor up to 11,000 feet. Then I drop that down to 1,200 feet per hour over 11,000 feet of elevation. And that is, those 2 numbers are what I know from my time. And when you get steeper, using just elevation has worked very effectively for me. So looking at our Mount Rainier example now, which should be back up on the screen, I'm going to pull up just the profile of our first route. So we have 9,000 feet of elevation gain. The simplest method that you can use is just looking at your elevation gain. If you're quite fit, then you could say 1,000 feet per hour for this total route as you move up it, considering a moderately light load. If you're not, then I'd recommend, or you're not familiar with your rate of ascent, then I'd recommend using our Munter units. So for Munter units, assuming walking uphill, we have 9,000 vertical feet. So that is going to be 90. 90 Munter units plus, let's see, we have 7 miles, which, let's see if I can convert that to kilometers. So 7 miles, so 11.7. So I'll just round up to 12 kilometers. So we have 102 Munter units. So 102 divided by our modifier of walking uphill of 4 would be, for the simplicity of math, 25. So the math there would end up being 25 hours for this route, assuming a fairly slow rate of ascent. So Andrew, did I answer your question fully?
Yep. Thanks.
Rad. Anything else you're curious about for this or things to add? Otherwise, I'm going to just put a pin in it here and call it a day.
No, I think that's it, man. Appreciate it.
Right on, Andrew. Thanks for joining. And I look forward to sharing Aconcagua with y'all next week.